It is Thursday, February 13th. This is First Alert Plus. Meteorologist Nicholas Snyder here. And yes, you probably have heard by now we are talking a major flooding event that will be set to move on in for this weekend. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. On top of this, we're also talking about winter set to make its return as we head into next week. Yes, it is going to be feeling very winter-like next week, and maybe even a few snow chances will return to the area. And our late February pattern, that is a question that everyone wants to know as well. So let's get right into what we're talking about here in terms of our weather. First, of course, we have to talk about what's going on in the upper air. Here's our storm system. It's off the Pacific coast right here. We'll highlight that for you. It's this area of low pressure, this curl that you're seeing in the clouds. Of course, the winds coming out of the north and west right here, and moisture coming in from the Pacific right here. Out here, this is what we call an atmospheric river. The good thing for much of the central portions of the United States, though, is as this moves further off to the east into the Rocky Mountains, it's hitting a lot of drier air out here. Notice all that drier air that is over the Rocky Mountains. That dry air is really going to decay this system away as it moves off to the east. However, it is going to start to tap into some gulf of moisture here. That's going to cause some issues over portions of the area. Already flood watches that are in place for the entire WSAZ viewing area, and we also are talking about flood warnings. Now, usually when you see these flood warnings here, like you're seeing here at the Tug River, like you're seeing here at the Guyandotte River, like you're seeing here at the Cole River, and like you're seeing here, of course, at the Little Sandy River over toward the Grayson area, when we see these, flooding is typically ongoing. The National Weather Service is so confident in flood conditions expected during this time frame that they've already issued these flood warnings for Saturday night, Sunday, and even into Monday too. That's how concerning this flood threat is going to be over much of the area. That's how much certainty there really is with this system. So let's kind of get into the meteorology of what's going on here. Let's talk all about what we can expect over much of the area. Of course, there's that system. It comes across the Pacific Ocean, taps into that Gulf moisture, that moisture surging on up into our area right here, and it lifts up and over this front right here. This front's going to be key, that warm front right there. As that is lifted up and over that front, we're going to start to see that moisture produce a good train of rain. When I talk about training, it means rain that's just falling on top of itself over and over and over much of an area. That is what's going to be headed our way for the day Saturday. Meanwhile, this cold front's going to cross the area, and that's going to drive another round of rain pushing on through. So now getting into some more of the specifics here, let's look at some of the models. So this is the European model. This is showing winds about 2,000 to 3,000 feet, or maybe even up to 1,500 feet up above the ground level. So it's showing winds at a meteorological term 850 millibars, or a pressure level of that. We want to watch the nose of this. Really strong winds happening in this yellow right here. Weaker winds happening in this green corridor right there. And think about as you're driving on a car in the freeway, you come up to a traffic jam, all the cars just kind of slow down. They get closer and closer together. That's what we call converging of air. When air converges like that, it has nowhere to go but up. And when you get rising air, you talk about the development of more precipitation. So right along the nose of that stronger wind high up in the sky, about 1,500 to 2,000 feet up in the sky, is where we're talking about that rain kind of setting up in a band of showers and thunderstorms, some of which could be heavy. That's the European model. Notice as we move it forward, kind of dives to the south a little bit, but goes right back up to the north, setting up shop again over a good chunk of areas basically just near or just to the south of I-64 right here. And that's where that band of rain we are really concerned about setting up, at least on this model. American model has looked a little different as we've moved forward here, but as we've gotten closer and closer to the event, it's coming into more of an agreement. Notice again, during the morning hours, setting up into the coal fields initially, and as we move it forward, starts to come up a little bit further to the north, just south of I-64. And then as we head forward, comes even further north during the overnight hours, creates some heavy rain for Huntington and Charleston, and then of course the cold front kind of wipes it all out, brings us some drier air for the day on Sunday. That's what we're looking at. Let's combine these two. First, looking at the European model. Again, there's that initial band of heavy rain right in here. You'll notice that darker green area in places like Moorhead, in places like West Liberty, Salyersville, out toward Louisa, up toward Huntington, even up toward places like Ashland and Ironton. Some good heavy rain. Let's move it forward. Initially kind of dives a little bit to the south, but then lifts back up to the north, right along that I-64 corridor, where you see that yellow right in there. That's going to be a major concern here, because when you get rain on top of rain falling at this rate here, you're talking multiple inches of rain likely to fall right there in that yellow. And then, of course, the cold front comes through, kind of wipes it all out, and yes, we will even change some of that rain to snow during the day on Sunday. Let's look at the American model. Again, very similar situation with that yellow band setting up a little bit further to the south of what the European had. Of course, this has trended a little bit further to the north as of late, so we're kind of seeing a trend where near or just to the south of the I-64 corridor, we are going to see that development of some of that heavier rain on Saturday. Moving this forward, notice how it lifts up to the north, and then the cold front sweeps through late Saturday night into Sunday morning. And then, of course, we change you over to snow during that time frame. This is the NAM model, or the North American model, showing a very similar situation. This is higher resolution, gives us a finer scale, a more realistic view of our atmosphere here. We'll start out seeing that band of rain, again, near that I-64 corridor, setting up early Saturday afternoon into Sunday here, near or just to the south of the I-64 corridor. And then it continues. If that verifies, you're talking about 3, 4, maybe even 4.5 inches of rain over that general area in a waterlogged ground already. Major flood concerns with that, for sure. Flash flooding, creeks and stream flooding, you name it, definitely a likelihood here. So this is what we're thinking on our map here. Of course, a general 3 to 4 inches of rain here. In that band. Of course, right now we're expecting that near or just to the south of the I-64 corridor, but widespread over the entire WSAZ viewing area, you are talking about a good 2 to 3 inches of rain likely. So with 3 to 4 inches of rain, best case scenario is something like last week happening. Worst case scenario is something much worse. So much certainty, the National Weather Service Weather Prediction Center has in this entire red area, that's a level 3 of 4, so that's the second highest level, moderate risk of excessive rainfall in that red area. That includes the entire WSAZ viewing area. Wouldn't be surprised if we saw them up that a little bit higher too as we move forward into the day tomorrow. Higher chances further to the west. And again, this is the best case scenario, as Tony has mentioned here. This is what happened last week at Enslow Park, at places like areas near the Four Pole Creek. I have trouble saying that sometimes. Rain accumulation of 3.5 inches over in that general area, and we could be seeing even more as we head on a little bit to this weekend. So I was talking with Tony this afternoon, and he mentioned to me he saw some numbers on some data he was looking at that reminded him of another flood that was pretty interesting. Tell me about that a little bit.
It was 1997, it was the 1st of March, and we were predicting a heavy rain event and flooding over the weekend. And that Friday night, the numbers came out on my supercomputer. I call something called a foos, and I said, oh my gosh. Well, we're 25 years later, and those numbers came out again looking into the weekend. So it's kind of like pattern recognition. That's how we do a lot of forecasting. You look at the science very, very closely. I do also, but not nearly like you do. But I look at a lot of pattern recognition. I said, oh, I saw that in 1997. This kind of reminded me what we went through in 97, flooding at a broad scale. 2016, Elk River Valley up into the Greenbrier Valley, missing Huntington, Charleston. 2022, it was southeast Kentucky. In July, earlier in May, it was the Four Pole Creek. But this one is like at a huge expanse. So if you think about the Ohio River runs from Old Three River Stadium in Pittsburgh, 981 miles to its mouth at Cairo, Illinois. That entire area is in that zone you just showed. And that's the area that gets 2 to 4 inches of rain every square mile in that. And there are tens and hundreds of thousands of square miles in that zone. And so this looks to be the severity that we saw back in 1997. That said, I don't want to say that the same thing happened in this town is going to happen again. I'm simply saying the meteorology suggests the scale of this will be like 1997. Bill Murray, one of our renowned reporters and anchors, reported in Chesapeake, Ohio, on the Today Show that Monday with hip boots on, and downtown Chesapeake was flooded. Does that mean downtown Chesapeake is going to get flooded this time? It doesn't. The first drop of rain hasn't fallen. It's still almost 2 days away. But once it occurs, then we'll be able to look at the hydrographs from the National Weather Service and start to fine-tune exactly how high will the rivers go. And I'm talking about the Great Kanawha and especially the mighty Ohio. The Kanawha is somewhat protected because of flood control dams at Bluestone on the New, Elk River up at Sutton, and the Somersville for the Golly River. So as Steve Clewell from the Army Corps told me 30 years ago, Tony, the way Charleston floods is if all the water flows below the dams. Well, in this case, it's a broad scale, so expectations are the Army Corps will be very skillful in keeping the flood stage at Charleston near 30 feet. But they can't do that on the Ohio River, and that's why already in Huntington, for example, tomorrow the plan is to start erecting some of the flood walls in anticipation of high water next week.
And Tony, as you mentioned, as you said earlier, we can't pinpoint exactly one town or one city that's going to see flooding, but everyone in the viewing area has that at least chance of seeing something to that nature.
If you get 2 to 4 inches of rain that you're forecasting, that we're forecasting, virtually every stream in our area will rise to or go above flood stage. Maybe it's a minor trickle over in some areas, and maybe it's a major event. Maybe it's a event that causes water into homes and causes streams to float cars away, like that depiction you did at 6 o'clock on augmented reality. This is the type of weather pattern, and when you showed that excessive from the National Weather Service, from the Climate Prediction Center, of that huge bullseye, and we were right in the middle of it. The interesting thing, I want to go back and talk about Helene back in September. The flood that occurred in western North Carolina was preceded by 5 inches of rain that week. Now, our area, it's not like we're starting out with a dry ground.
Right.
We're starting out with the ground wet. So the threshold for flooding is lower, and the threshold for excessive high water is higher because of that.
And you also mentioned, too, back when you were looking at this in 1997, you saw this a day before. This is now 2 days before, so it really shows you the confidence in the event that is likely to occur here.
That was literally the night before.
Right.
Friday night leaving for Saturday, and here we are seeing it on Thursday. That's how far the supercomputers have come along. And so, you know, we missed the forecast earlier this week a bit. We had snow in the I-64 stretch of 3 to 6 inches. We wound up with an inch or two. That 2 to 4 and 3 to 6 fell through the coal field. So we were off by
about
roughly
20
or 30 miles. So there is always give and take. But we're 2 days out from the event, and right now every model, you and Brandon picked up on this last weekend. You were mentioning a serious event could be coming next weekend, which is this weekend. I kind of bided my time and waited for Monday, but you guys were spot on. And here we are a week later, and we're looking at the same data you guys were checking last week. Things haven't changed. So it's kind of like when every model comes in and says it time after time, then you know with a high confidence it's going to occur.
Right, and then as you mentioned too, it could shift a couple dozen miles to the north or south, but right now pretty high confidence near or just south of that I-64 corridor going to be the biggest event. But of course 2 to 4 inches of rain widespread can cause some major flooding concerns everywhere.
I'm just trying to think of how we're going to get the information out for all these rivers and streams in each individual location. That's what OTT is probably going to be best at this weekend, because we have the opportunity to go long so that we hit every forecast point. If you live in Branchland, you're interested in the Guyandot River in Branchland. If you live in Logan, the Guyandot River, we've got so many points out there, and each individual hydrograph, and these will change in time. So when you see a forecast crest for your area, it doesn't mean it's set in stone. Until the last drop of rain falls, we won't be able to say with a high confidence exactly what the crest will be at every one point on every river and every major stream.
Tony, thanks again for coming on. Of
Great
course,
job, Nicholas.
we're going to continue to keep track of this on OTT all weekend, too. All four of us are going to be in the office this weekend, so it'll be quite an interesting thing this weekend.
Lots
to see
to
for
learn
sure.
this weekend. I
Yes.
hope I can add to some of my expertise from other storms, because you guys are at the forefront of forecasting in our area.
No, thank you, Tony. Thank you so much. And again, all four of us are going to be in this weekend talking about, again, what the best case scenario looks to be. A event like what happened on the Four-Pole Creek last week, and maybe even something worse could be on the way. Of course, we'll continue to keep you updated on what could be headed our way down the line into this weekend. Meanwhile, we are talking about a pattern change headed our way for next week. And yes, this means more winter weather is likely to move back into the area. What do I mean by this? Of course, this is our European model once again. We are looking at the upper air, and I want you to notice one little thing here, that strong area of wind. I talked about this a little bit last week on First Alert Plus, and how you get air converging and diverging and how important that is in terms of forecasting where precipitation is going to fall and impacts on that. We're seeing this kind of setup, a very similar setup, once again to what we saw earlier on this week, where higher up in the sky, this time we're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 feet higher up in the sky, a strong area of wind right in here that I circled in the red is going to cause some air diverging away from each other. When you get diverging air aloft, air rises into that to fill that void, and that's certainly what's going to occur going into, let's say, the beginning of the middle of next week here. We have strong winds pulling that a little bit to the north, and of course further to the south you have weaker winds, and that Coriolis force really kicks in. So that air kind of separates from each other, it diverges away and causes some rising motion. What that means for your night, Tuesday night into Wednesday, with the cold air in place, yes, at least a little bit of snow is going to be expected here. Now, this is the European model. I'm going to clear off everything I drew on here because there's something interesting that happens beyond the Tuesday into Wednesday time frame, especially on this model. Let's set the map in motion right here. Moving this forward, I want you to notice that next little disturbance right in here. These stronger winds and this little kink in those white lines. That would indicate another area of low pressure that could be likely to form downwind of this right about there. What that means for our area is that, yes, even more snow could be expected in the Wednesday to Thursday time frame. But as you'll see in a little bit, not every model's on board. As Tony mentioned earlier when he was talking about how all the models, they kind of agree, they've been saying the same thing on this weekend flooding event. This event with the snow next week, this is not the case. They're kind of all over the place. There's very, very low certainty in us seeing any major snow next week. So I want to calm some nerves about the potential of seeing some snow, because we really at this point have no skill in forecasting that. Just know there's a chance at seeing some snow, and some impactful snow, yes, there's a chance, but chances right now look fairly low. Of course, that can change in the coming days. We'll continue to keep you updated. Of course, flooding remains at the forefront now, but we are talking about this pattern that continues to move on in. This would mean some impactful snow for our area during the day Wednesday, during the day on Thursday, and a little bit on Tuesday. I'll show you what I mean here. This is, again, the European model showing that. Here's that Tuesday night system. It's a little bit weaker on the Euro, just a little bit of light snow expected over the area showing up on this model. It's a little bit less in terms of that moisture than what you'll see on the American model. Just some light snow, likely not a whole lot of accumulation with that. Let's continue to move this forward though, and as we head into that Wednesday night into Thursday time frame, you're talking about the potential of some impactful snow if this run comes true. Again, there's low certainty with this event. That means we're not really sure exactly what's going to happen. The models are all over the place right now, and it's up to us to determine that. And probably we're not going to know for sure what's going to happen toward the middle of next week until this weekend event gets through, so we can get all that data ingested and everything like that. And of course, the weekend event right now, with likely some big-time flooding, is going to take forefront. Let's continue to set this in motion. Again, that's our European model showing the potential of some impactful snow going into the middle and end of next week. Now let's look at the American model, because this is drastically different. I want you to notice here on the American model how we're seeing, again, some of that stronger wind here. So that means that diverging air, wind being pulled by that pressure gradient force up here, pulled to the right down here because it's weaker. So there's still diverging air here. However, on the American model, there's a little bit more moisture left over here. And that would mean more snow on Tuesday night into Wednesday and less snow on Thursday because cold air takes over. I'll show you what I mean here. Let's clear everything off this map, and we'll move this forward into the Wednesday and Thursday time frame because this is really interesting how different these two models are. Let's pause it right there. Notice where that energy is, way further to the south here, much further to the south compared to where the European model is. What that means is, of course, all of that snow that we saw on Thursday from the European model, not even close to touching our viewing area on Wednesday into Thursday. Drastically different in the two models. That's why the certainty is so low here between the two models. And again, this is what it translates to on a future radar perspective. A little bit more of that snow on Tuesday night into Wednesday here with a little bit of a band coming into that what we call entrance region of that strong wind high up in the sky at about 5,000 to 6,000 feet up. And then as we move it forward, we clear you out, and look how little snow impacts us on Thursday thanks to that energy being well to our south here as opposed to further to the north like the European model showed. In fact, we should get barely any impactful snow out of that American model run compared to what we see on the European model. So bottom line is, anything you see about snow next week, we are still very, very low confidence in that event, and don't take any accumulation totals verbatim because it's way too early to know that. Of course, we will continue to keep you updated, and we're giving you that first alert now to the potential of some impactful snow, but that potential remains fairly uncertain at this point going into the middle of next week. A lot to iron out between now and then. Of course, on top of that, major flood concerns, which we do know is a high certainty as we head into much of the weekend. As we head into late February, too, let's talk about that pattern. We've been talking about, of course, all sorts of patterns. It's been very warm over the last, really, let's say, couple of weeks here. Things are about to change. On our European model and our American model, we are seeing lots of signals that indicate we're likely to see cooler than average temperatures that we'll work on in. Climate Prediction Center even showing this in their forecasts as well right here. Drier than normal and cooler than normal areas over much of the area. So that means as we head into the beginning of March, things will be looking a whole lot different in terms of what we've been seeing. Of course, I know a lot of people may not welcome the cooler than normal weather, but I'm sure a lot of people will really welcome that drier than normal weather, especially with how much rain we've added up over the last couple of weeks here. And that's going to be very important going into March. We get some drier than normal weather. It'll really help the cleanup efforts from, of course, what we saw at Four Pole Creek last weekend and Enslow Park as well. And, of course, it'll help things as we head into this weekend. So big-time changes on the way, some for the better, some for the worse. Cooler than normal temperatures likely, but also drier than normal precipitation, which is really going to help us out after, of course, a very rainy beginning of February. Of course, this is First Alert Plus. We air every Thursday, or rather every Tuesday, Thursday this week and last week because of some outstanding circumstances, but usually every Tuesday, 6:45 p.m. We'll get you the latest on everything you need to know, historical context. Tony will come on ever so often, and maybe even a few weather guests talking about their latest research on a quiet weather period. I'm Nicholas Snyder. Make it a great Thursday.